before you hear what happened, before you find out why she walked into that house and never looked back, hit like and subscribe to the channel. Because some stories aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to stay with you. Don't forget who you are, even if everyone else does. My mother's voice was barely a whisper, but it struck like a bell inside my chest. That morning, I pressed a warm mug of chamomile tea into her hands, but she didn't take it. Her fingers were too thin, too tired. I held the cup instead, feeling the heat seep into my palms. Outside, Vermont's autumn sky was the color of old wool, low and silent, like it knew what I was about to do. The woman lying in the bed was not the same Sarah who used to work 12 hours a day at the tailor shop, then come home and mend the neighbors' coats without charging a dime. That woman had fire in her bones. This version, my Sarah, was gentler now, folded into the shape of a body that had fought too many winters. I was leaving that morning. Not forever, I told myself. Just for now. Just until the end of winter. Just until her treatments were paid for. Just until the weight on her chest, both literal and metaphorical, eased enough for her to breathe again. I was marrying a man I didn't love. A man I barely knew. Dominic Ashford. The contract said 3 years. Enough time, enough money, enough distance. I watched her breathe, 1 second at a time, and when she opened her eyes and looked at me, she smiled, just a little. "You were always braver than me," she said. I shook my head. "No, just quieter." She reached out, brushed a strand of hair from my cheek, then let her hand fall back to the blanket. That was the last thing she said before I left. Not a goodbye. Not a blessing. Just that one truth. Don't forget who you are. I didn't have the heart to tell her. I already had. Ashford Estate rose out of the trees like it didn't belong to this time or this world. Gray stone, tall windows, slate roof, all smothered by ivy that had turned a deep, rust red. It looked more like a mausoleum than a mansion. I stood at the front steps for a moment, suitcase in hand, the hem of my coat brushing my ankles. A man, with silver hair and a tie too tight, introduced himself as Ellis. He didn't smile. He led me through the front hall with the solemn grace of a funeral director. "Mr. Ashford is expecting you in the study. Not your husband, not Dominic. Just Mr. Ashford. So be it." The study was large, wood-paneled, and smelled faintly of whiskey and cedar. Light slanted through the high windows, dust floating like ash in the beams. Dominic stood with his back to me, flipping through a file folder. "You're on time," he said, without looking up. I was raised that way. He turned then. His face was sharper than I remembered, more tired, more precise. His eyes were the only thing warm about him, and even then, only barely. There was no kiss. No embrace. Just a stack of papers placed on the desk between us. "This is the agreement," he said. "Nothing has changed." He wasn't lying. Every clause was exactly as I'd seen it. No claim to inheritance, no shared assets, and no expectation of affection. 3 years. Discreet separation of personal lives. In exchange, full financial support for my mother's medical care. I signed it. 1 page at a time. Hands steady. Eyes dry. As I slid the last paper back to him, Dominic added 1 more sheet, handwritten. Not part of the formal contract. "This is a personal condition," he said, setting it gently before me. I read it. "You are not to enter the 3rd floor. Not for me. For you. You won't want what's behind that door." I looked up. His expression hadn't changed, but there was a flicker there, just for a second. Something heavy. Maybe shame. Maybe memory. "What's up there?" I asked. He didn't answer. Only turned toward the window, his hand closing over the edge of the desk until his knuckles whitened. There are things we keep locked, he said, quietly. Not because they're dangerous, but because we don't trust ourselves to look at them again. The wedding was brief, not rushed, just restrained. The kind of ceremony you'd expect at the end of a negotiation. There were no guests, just a minister with a polite smile, Ellis standing in the back, and 2 signatures waiting on a line. Wore the dress my mother had sewn for me when I was 16, thinking I'd wear it for love. Dominic wore gray. No tie, no boutonniere. Do you, Mr. Ashford? Yes. And do you, Ms. Hart? Yes. No vows, no rings, no flowers. Only a glance exchanged like a closing deal. That night, I lay alone in a guest room on the 2nd floor. Not the master suite, not our room. The window looked out onto a winter garden gone quiet. The walls were cream and old rose, trimmed in walnut. The air smelled faintly of lavender and varnish. I unpacked one dress, folded my coat, placed the tea tin from home on the nightstand. Then I pulled out the folded slip of handwritten paper from the inside pocket of my bag. The one that wasn't part of the legal contract, but somehow felt more binding, not for me, for you. I stared at that line until the words blurred. It wasn't the threat that haunted me. It was the compassion, the idea that something upstairs might hurt me, not him, that he thought I wasn't ready. And that was the first night I began to wonder, what exactly did he think I'd find behind that door? And even more than that, the 3rd floor didn't call to me. It watched. Like it knew I was the kind of person who peeked through keyholes. The days at Ashford Estate settled into a rhythm that didn't ask for me to belong. No one told me where to sit, what to do, or when to speak. The house simply opened its doors, at sunrise, and let me drift inside it like a ghost that hadn't made up her mind about haunting. I started waking before the staff. I liked the way the light crept in through the tall windows and painted the floors gold. I made my own tea, toasted my own bread. The kitchen didn't seem to mind. Dominic and I didn't cross paths. Not at breakfast. Not in the halls. Not even when I wandered into the music room and let my fingers trail along the silent keys of the grand piano. His silence didn't offend me. If anything, it mirrored mine. Neither of us had come here looking for companionship. Still, I watched. I learned that he left every morning at 8 Moana sharp and returned at 6:30. I learned he didn't use the main staircase, only the side one, the one closest to the east wing. And I learned that every door on the 3rd floor remained locked. Except one. The last one at the end of the corridor. The door with no keyhole. On the 4th morning, I found the library. It wasn't marked, just a plain door behind a velvet curtain, in the sitting room, tucked between a globe and a grandfather clock. Inside was a cathedral of shelves, floor to ceiling, warm with the smell of paper and dust. Books lined every inch, novels, histories, old legal codes, and poetry with broken spines. I didn't know why it felt like I was trespassing. I sat in the window seat and reached blindly for a book. It was an old copy of Persuasion, the edges soft with age, the pages foxed with brown specks. When I opened it, something slipped out. A photograph, black and white, slightly curled. 2 women standing side by side in front of the Ashford fountain. One wore a summer dress with tiny flowers. The other wore a maid's uniform, crisp and clean. I didn't recognize them right away. But then I looked closer at the woman in uniform, and my breath caught. It was Sarah. My Sarah, 20 years younger, maybe more. Her smile was different then, uncurled, free. And the woman beside her, she was beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, graceful hands, eyes that held their own light. I didn't need to ask. That was Eleanor. I turned the photo over. There was a note written in faded blue ink. To Ellie, you were always more than a friend. Love, Sarah. The words blurred for a second. Not because I was crying, but because something broke loose inside me. Something I didn't know had been coiled there. I put the photo back in the book, left the library without checking out anything else. The next time I saw Ellis, I asked him, did Sarah work here? His eyebrows rose, just barely. Yes, he said. Long ago. With Eleanor? They were close. I waited for more, but he didn't offer it, and I didn't press. Some stories can't be forced out. They have to rise on their own. That evening, I waited in the drawing room. I didn't know why. I think part of me hoped Dominic would come in, not to talk, just to see that I was still here. Instead, I sat in silence, staring at the fire, and thinking about Sarah, about Eleanor, about the message on that photo. You were always more than a friend. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't dramatic. It was the kind of thing you write when you don't know what else to say, but you want someone to read between the lines. I couldn't ask Sarah now. She was too far into her illness, and maybe she'd never wanted me to know. But something about that photo burned at the edges of my mind. Why was it hidden in a book? Why was it left behind? Had she forgotten it? Or had she meant for me to find it? I slept poorly that night. Not from fear, but from questions. Why hadn't Dominic mentioned their connection? Why had Sarah never told me she lived in this house? And what happened between her and Eleanor that left the air around the third floor so unbreathable? The next morning, I returned to the library. I searched the same shelf, found Persuasion again. This time, no photo, just a folded scrap of paper tucked into the inside cover. It was part of a letter, torn at the top. She says she trusts her, but I've seen the way she looks at him. Maybe Sarah doesn't realize what she's doing, or maybe she does. But I won't wait around to be humiliated. It wasn't signed, but I knew that voice. Even in ink, it carried an edge. And just like that, the mystery of the third floor no longer belonged to Dominic alone. It belonged to my mother, and to the woman she may have loved and lost. Some people leave through the front door. Others slip away without sound, without goodbye, leaving only the rooms behind to remember them. I didn't plan to go up there. I told myself I was only walking, only exploring, only getting to know the creaks and groans of a house too large for its own silence. But my feet knew better. They carried me, step by step, to the third floor landing, where the air felt slightly colder, like the house was holding its breath. The corridor stretched long, lined with tall windows and paintings turned in just enough to feel like they were listening. The carpet was older here, faded in places, as if time itself had worn a path from habit, not footsteps. 3 doors, 2 locked, 1 open, the one at the end, the one with no keyhole. I paused, then pressed my hand to the doorknob. It didn't resist. It turned without a sound, and the door eased inward like it had been waiting. No creak, no protest, just a hush. And the faint scent of lavender, old paper, and something harder to name, like longing that hadn't had time to fade. The room wasn't grand. It was personal, intimate. Light spilled in through sheer curtains, dust turning in it like falling ash. A vanity stood near the window, still holding a silver hairbrush. A shawl had been left on the chair's back, blue with white embroidery. The thread frayed but intact. A pair of books were stacked neatly on the nightstand. Beside them, a porcelain teacup with a crack running through its side, and on the bed, a notebook. I walked slowly, unsure if I was trespassing on a memory or a ghost. I picked up the notebook. Inside, the handwriting was fine and deliberate. It didn't need a signature. I knew it was Eleanor's. She had written about the house, the cold spots, the way her reflection sometimes looked older than her own face, the garden she'd tried to plant, the rooms she avoided, the nights Dominic didn't come to bed. She wrote about Sarah. Sarah laughs in the kitchen like she owns the walls. Dominic pretends not to hear her. But I do. I wonder if it's jealousy or relief. Sometimes I think she sees me better than he does. Then again, she sees too much. Even the things I try not to feel. Page after page, Eleanor unraveled herself in ink. I felt like I was eavesdropping on someone falling apart. Halfway through the book, a change came. The lines became sharper, less wondering, more cutting. He looked at her again today. I saw it. Maybe he doesn't even realize. Maybe she doesn't either. But I'm not stupid. She used to be mine. Before she became convenient for him. That stopped. Me. She used to be mine. There it was, in black and white. The thing the photograph had only implied. They had loved, and it had ended, not with tragedy, but with betrayal, or at least the belief in it. The final pages were ripped out. I sat back on the bed, staring at the empty spine where the end of her story had been. No conclusion. No resolution. Just silence. I should have left then. Should have closed the door. Pretended I hadn't read what wasn't meant for me. But there was one drawer in the vanity that hadn't been opened, and something inside me whispered, "Finish it." Slid it open slowly. Inside, folded carefully, was a letter, addressed not to Dominic. Not to Sarah, but to someone else. Someone named Adele. Dear Adele, I should have told you what I saw. But by the time I realized it, it felt too late. I can't stay here. Not with him. Not with her. The walls are closing in, and I don't trust what I feel anymore. I don't trust myself. I thought Sarah was mine. But she made her choice. Tell them I left because I needed space. That's true enough. Just don't tell them I saw it. Don't tell them about the night in the library. They'll know what it means. And I can't be the one to break it all. I folded the letter, hands trembling slightly. Not because of Eleanor's pain, but because I had no idea what the night in the library meant. No idea what she'd seen. Only that it had broken something. Something between three people, none of whom had ever told me the whole truth. I returned the letter, stood in the middle of the room, took one last look. Noticed something strange. There was no dust on the teacup, no layer of time on the shawl. Someone had cleaned here. Recently. Dominic? Ellis? Someone else? Or maybe no one had ever really left. I closed the door behind me. Didn't lock it, didn't have the key. But I understood something now. Dominic hadn't locked the third floor to keep me out. He had locked it to stop time from finishing what it started, and maybe I had just restarted the clock. I didn't go looking for a confrontation. But sometimes silence becomes so loud, it pushes you into speaking just to hear yourself over it. That night, the wind screamed through the cracks in the window panes like it had something to say, the kind of wind that made you believe walls could whisper, that doors could breathe. I'd tried to sleep. I couldn't. Eleanor's voice kept running through my head. Not her real voice, but her ink, her suspicion, her grief, her unfinished story, and that letter, meant for someone named Adele, but clearly intended to be found. Eventually. What had she seen in the library? What had happened that made her leave without warning, without goodbye? And what did Sarah have to do with it? I found myself standing in the hallway outside Dominic's study, barefoot, arms crossed against the cold, with no plan and too many questions. The door was open. He was inside, standing near the fireplace, one hand pressed to the mantel, the other holding a glass of something dark. He turned when he heard me, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. "You knew she was close to Sarah," I said. "Didn't you?" His jaw tightened. The glass in his hand lowered slightly. "Yes." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Would it have changed your mind?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. I stepped into the room. My voice dropped. Eleanor thought Sarah betrayed her. His shoulders stiffened. Then slowly he sat down. Not with defeat, but with weariness. "Eleanor thought many things. And you never corrected her?" He looked up at me then. For the first time since the wedding really looked. She didn't want the truth. She wanted proof that her pain had a villain. I was convenient. So was Sarah. "So you let her go?" "No," he said. And this time his voice cracked just enough to break something between us. "She left before I had the courage to stop her." There was silence after that. But not the heavy kind. The waiting kind. Like the air between the seconds of a ticking clock. He poured another drink and offered me one. I shook my head. He drank his slowly, then set the glass aside. "You think I'm cold?" he said. "You are." He didn't flinch. "You think I married you out of convenience?" "Didn't." "You?" A pause. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I married you because Sarah once told me I'd forgotten how to be decent. She said I needed someone who wasn't afraid of quiet. Someone who would notice the parts of the house I stopped looking at." "So this was her idea?" "No," he said. But it would have made her smile. I sat down across from him. The fire crackled between us, throwing gold shadows across the floor. "What happened to her? To Sarah and Eleanor?" "I don't know the whole story," he admitted. "But I know they loved each other. I know they hurt each other. And I know Eleanor saw something, or thought she did, that made her believe Sarah had crossed a line." "With you." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it either. Then, after a long silence, he asked the question I didn't see coming. "Do you think you're like her?" "Sarah?" "No," he said, eyes locked on mine. "Eleanor." I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know how to explain that I saw myself in both. In the silence, in the waiting, in the rooms we both walked into, hoping to feel whole, only to find ghosts that weren't ready to speak. I stood up, suddenly tired. "Good night, Dominic." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but he didn't. Until I reached the door. "Isabel." I turned. "I didn't lock the third floor because of Eleanor," he said. "I locked it because I was afraid of what I left up there, of the version of myself I'd become when I stopped asking for forgiveness." He didn't ask me to stay. He didn't apologize. But something about that confession, that bare, honest line, when I stopped asking for forgiveness, felt more intimate than any vow I could have written. I left the room and walked the halls alone, the wind still tapping at the windows like a child wanting in. In that moment, I didn't know if I trusted Dominic. But I knew this. He wasn't the only one who had something to be forgiven for. Sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with the sound of two forks scraping the bottom of an empty bowl. The next morning, the house was quiet again, but something in it had shifted. I didn't see Dominic at breakfast. Not that I expected to, but the air in the hallway no longer felt as if it were holding something back. Instead, it felt waiting. I spent most of the morning in the kitchen. It wasn't mine, but the cook was off that day, and the staff had learned to give me space without asking why I needed it. I found carrots in the cellar, potatoes, a small cut of beef that looked like it had been meant for someone else. I made stew. Simple, old-fashioned, the kind my mother, Sarah, had taught me to make with nothing more than leftover herbs and a good instinct for timing. I didn't know who I was making it for, maybe her, maybe him, maybe me. By evening, the scent had filled the downstairs halls. It clung to the drapes and crept under the doors, comforting in a way that didn't ask permission. I set 2 bowls on the long wooden table in the dining room, then lit the low lamps overhead and waited. 5 minutes. 10. 15. I told myself I would eat alone. But then I heard footsteps. Measured, clean, familiar. Dominic appeared in the doorway, coat removed, tie still askew, eyes unreadable. He said nothing, just looked at the table, then at me. "You made dinner?" "I made stew," I corrected. The house was cold. He didn't move right away, but then he crossed the room and sat down. His movements were slower than usual, like he wasn't sure what to expect. We ate in silence, the kind that wasn't heavy, just real. 2 people chewing in rhythm, not because they were trying to match, but because they finally had a reason to slow down. "This is good," Dominic said, almost at the bottom of his bowl. I glanced up. "You sound surprised," he smiled. A small slanted thing, almost reluctant. "I haven't had this since..." He stopped. "Since Eleanor?" "No," he said. "Since Sarah." The name stopped both our hands for a second. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. "It was a night like this," he said. Wind howling. Power had gone out in the West Wing. Eleanor was upstairs. I'd been gone for days. Business trip to Montreal. I came back, and Sarah had made stew. No one else in the house. Just her. In the kitchen, like nothing had ever gone wrong. "Did she say anything?" "No," he said. "She just handed me a bowl, sat down, watched me eat. And I think it was the first time in months I didn't feel like I was made of stone. I didn't know what to say to that. So, I didn't say anything. Instead, I poured him another helping. He accepted it. This time, he didn't eat as fast. He took his time, as if he knew this moment didn't need to be filled with noise. After dinner, I started to gather the dishes. He stood. "Leave them," he said. "Someone has to. I'll do them." I turned to face him, a little amused. "You wash dishes?" "Only when it matters." He picked up the bowls and took them to the sink. I watched him rinse the stew pot, roll up his sleeves, and start scrubbing with careful, practiced movements. There was something deeply human in it. A man with too many ghosts, finally doing something for the living. "Why did Sarah really leave?" I asked quietly. He kept scrubbing. "You mean, leave the house?" "Leave everything." He paused, rinsed, dried his hands on a towel. Then turned to me. Because she believed silence was better than damage. She thought leaving was safer than explaining. Safer for who? Everyone. Did she love Eleanor? He looked down for a moment, then back up. "Yes." "And you?" Longer pause. "I think she pitied me," he said softly. "Which is a kind of love. But not the kind I wanted." That answer stayed with me longer than anything else. Because it wasn't sad. It was honest. And sometimes honesty sounds like grief. I was heading toward the staircase when he spoke again. "She told me something once." I turned. "What?" "That I needed to stop locking the things I didn't want to face. That the house was starting to mirror me. Cold, quiet, untouched." He walked toward the window and looked out into the garden. She said one day, I'd meet someone who wouldn't. Just open the door, she'd walk through it, and sit down, and stay. He didn't look at me, didn't need to. Was that your way of saying thank you for dinner? I asked gently. That made him smile again. A real one this time. Not wide, but sure. Maybe. I went upstairs, not quite knowing what had changed, only that something had. Not in the way we looked at each other, but in the fact that we finally had. I stepped into my room, the fire in the grate just starting to die down. And there, on the table by the window, sat a small object I hadn't left there. A silver spoon. Old, engraved. It matched the set Eleanor had kept on her vanity. Attached was a folded note. She used to use this when she didn't want to eat alone. You don't have to either. Then just like that, a locked door opened. Not on the 3rd floor, but inside me. Some nights don't start with a kiss. They start with a silence so heavy, the only way to break it is skin against skin. The storm hit just after midnight. Rain came first. Soft at first, then heavy, then wild, like the sky had been waiting too long to let go. I couldn't sleep. The room was too warm, or maybe I was. The fire had died down, but something else in me was burning slow, under the ribs, behind the breath. I tried to read, then gave up. I walked barefoot down the hallway, passing portraits I no longer feared, passing locked doors that no longer whispered. The light under the study door was still on. I didn't knock. Dominic sat in the leather armchair, sleeves rolled, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, a book half open in his hand. He didn't look surprised to see me. He just nodded once. An invitation. Or permission. I walked in and stood near the fire, my arms crossed, more out of habit than modesty. Couldn't sleep, I said. The rain's loud tonight, he replied. Old roof. It listens to weather. A pause. I saw. Your note. I meant it. We stood like that for a moment. Him seated, me standing, the storm crackling outside like the end of something long and tired. Do you ever regret it? I asked. He looked up. What? Locking everything away, pretending you could live without closeness. His eyes didn't leave mine. They darkened slightly. I don't pretend. I live with the hunger. That was the moment something broke. Or maybe something finally gave in. I stepped closer. Slowly. He didn't move, didn't breathe, and when I reached him, his hand rose, tentative then firm, resting on the back of my neck. No words, just heat. He pulled me onto his lap, not like a man pulling a lover, but like someone finally claiming something long denied. Our mouths met in a kiss that wasn't sweet. It was rough, searching, unfinished. I gasped when he slid his hand under the hem of my nightdress, finding my thigh, then higher. You're shaking, he whispered. I know. Do you want this? Yes. He stood, lifting me as if I weighed nothing, carried me across the room, up the stairs to the master bedroom I'd never seen before. The room was dark except for one lamp. The bed was large. The sheets cool. He laid me down like I was something to unwrap. No rush, no demand, just steady hands and a gaze that never left mine. His shirt was gone first, then mine, then nothing but the sound of breath, skin against skin, heartbeats crashing, into rhythm. He kissed me hard, everywhere, along my collarbone, down my chest, across my stomach. He whispered things I couldn't hear over the thunder, but I felt them, in the way his mouth slowed, in the way his fingers learned the shape of my hips like reading Braille in the dark. When he entered me, I cried out, not in pain, not in shock, but in surrender. He held still, forehead resting against mine, breathing me in. We moved together like people who didn't know the steps, but followed the same music anyway. Faster, deeper, then slower again, like neither of us wanted it to end. After, he didn't speak. He didn't pull away. He just held me, one hand tangled in my hair, the other drawing lazy patterns across my spine. I pressed my ear to his chest, listening, not to his heartbeat, to the silence, the kind that only came after the truth. What now? I asked finally. Now we learn what this means, he replied. And if it doesn't mean anything, he kissed my shoulder. Then we make it mean something. We didn't fall asleep quickly, but we didn't speak again either. We didn't need to. The room knew what we were, two people who had lost too much, and finally found something they were willing to lose again, just to feel alive. But as I drifted off, something in the corner of the room caught my eye. A box. On the dresser, not locked, just closed. Carved initials on the top, E.A. Eleanor Ashford. And I knew, whatever this night was, it wasn't the end of a story. It was the beginning of the truth. Some truths don't scream when uncovered. They sit, quietly in a box, waiting for the one person brave enough to open them. I waited until Dominic left for town the next morning. He hadn't said much, just a soft kiss on the side of my head, a promise to return before dusk. I pretended to sleep, even though I'd been watching the light change on the ceiling for the last hour. As soon as the front door closed, I rose, wrapped myself in his robe, walked barefoot into the master bedroom, and stood in front of the dresser. The box was still there. E.A. Eleanor Ashford. The lid wasn't locked, just resting, like she'd always meant it to be found, but never dared to open it again herself. My fingers trembled as I lifted it. Inside, a small collection of keepsakes, a broken locket, a silk ribbon, a pair of opera gloves, yellowed with time, and beneath it all a stack of letters tied in green string. I sat on the edge of the bed and untied them, one by one. The first letter was dated nearly 2 decades ago, before Dominic's marriage, before Sarah left. They were written from Eleanor to Sarah, every page soaked in longing, in doubt, in guilt. I shouldn't want you. I know that. But every time you walk into the garden, I forget why we ever promised to stop. I hear him talking about you. He doesn't know it's more than kindness. He thinks he's protecting you. He doesn't see that I'm the one who needs protection, from myself. Then came the letters after Sarah left the estate. You were brave. You did what I couldn't. But now I'm here, alone. And he doesn't ask why you left. He just asks where you put the scissors. Dominic thinks you and I were nothing, but I dream of you every night. And when I wake up, I touch the empty half of the bed and pretend your warmth hasn't left. I want to hate you, but I can't. I stopped reading. My throat was tight, not from jealousy, but from grief, for them both. 2 women who tried to love quietly in a world that demanded silence and lost everything to it. At the bottom of the stack, folded differently from the others, was a final letter, not signed, not dated, but written in trembling ink. I saw it. In the library, the file, the contract, the signatures. Sarah never betrayed me. She protected me. He asked her to stay, to pretend, to marry him, so the rumors would stop, so I wouldn't be ruined. She agreed. She left me because she loved me, and I punished her for it. I punished both of them. I thought the silence was theirs, but it was mine. I closed the door. I left. I wrote the story the way I wanted to believe it, because the truth was too kind for my anger to survive. I pressed the letter to my chest. It was the first time I cried. Not for myself, not even for Sarah, but for Eleanor, who died believing her love had become betrayal, until too late. I spent the next hour walking the house, not pacing, not searching, just letting the walls speak again. Every painting, every locked door, every window. This house had been a stage for their pain. Now it had become a place of reckoning. When Dominic returned, I was waiting for him in the study. He saw my face. Didn't ask what happened. Just walked toward me and pulled me into his arms. "You opened it," he said, not as a question. "Yes." He exhaled slowly, like the house itself had finally let out its breath. "She knew, didn't she?" I whispered. "Sarah?" "Yes." She left, to protect Eleanor, not to run from her. "Sarah knew the price," he said. "She paid it, without hesitation. And you?" He paused. "I tried to be the villain. I thought if I became the reason Eleanor hated her, at least her anger had somewhere to go. You carried it all these years." "So did you," he said softly. "You just didn't know it yet." We sat down, in silence. His hand in mine. No fire, no music. Just the sound of something between us settling, like soil after rain. Then he reached into his coat and handed me a small envelope. "She sent this to me, a week before she passed. I never opened it." I looked at him. "Why?" "Because I was afraid it would say she never forgave me." I held the letter between us. "Do you want me to read it?" He hesitated, then nodded. I opened it. Inside was a single line, written in Sarah's firm, unshakable hand. "Tell her everything. She deserves the full story, before I'm gone." And beneath it, one name. Adele. My breath caught. Adele, the woman Eleanor wrote to in her letter, the one who had known the truth. "Do you know who she is?" I asked. Dominic frowned. "No. Should I? She knew about everything. Eleanor wrote to her." I looked at him. "What if she's still alive? Then she may be the only person who knows the whole story." The wind picked up again outside, but this time it didn't feel like it was morning. It felt like it was moving something forward. And I knew, before this ended, I'd have to find Adele. Even if it meant asking my mother the one question she never wanted to answer. Some endings are quiet. Not because they lack meaning, but because the people involved have finally run out of reasons to run. Her name was Adele Whitmore. It took 3 days of searching, old letters, nursing registry records, and finally, one contact card folded, behind a photo in Sarah's sewing kit. I don't know why my mother kept it. Maybe part of her always knew I'd need it someday. She lived 2 hours north, in a white cottage tucked behind an old Methodist chapel. When I arrived, she was in the garden, pruning lavender with slow, careful hands. Her back was curved with time, her fingers stiff, but her eyes, when she looked up, were sharp as ever. "You're Sarah's girl." It wasn't a question. We sat on the porch. She poured chamomile tea from a chipped pot that smelled faintly of earth and rosemary. For a while, she didn't ask why I'd come. She already knew. "I was there," she said quietly. "That night in the library." My breath caught. She kept her eyes on the trees. I watched it happen. Eleanor finding the contract, the signatures. Her face just collapsed. She thought Sarah had chosen Dominic over her. But she hadn't. No, Adele said. Sarah made a deal to protect Eleanor's name, her future. Dominic didn't force her. But he offered her something she thought she couldn't refuse. And Eleanor believed the worst. Because believing betrayal was easier than believing Sarah would give her up to save her. Adele's voice broke then. I told Eleanor the truth. Later, when she'd cooled down. But she wouldn't hear it. She said if Sarah had really loved her, she wouldn't have left at all. Did she regret it? A pause. Every day. I pulled out the letter from Eleanor, the one written to Adele, the one never sent. I handed it to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she read. When she finished, she closed her eyes for a long time, then folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket without a word. She never stopped. Loving Sarah, I said. I know, Adele whispered. Neither did I. That surprised me. I turned. You? She gave a small, sad smile. Not the way Eleanor did. But she was the kind of woman you loved just for walking into a room. I nodded. I understood that now. As I stood to leave, Adele placed a hand over mine. Your mother never told you, she said. But she didn't leave you to marry Dominic. She made sure you stayed with me for that first year, so you wouldn't grow up in that house, so you'd never see what love looked like when it turned to war. I always thought she abandoned me. She saved you, Adele said, even if it meant you'd hate her for a while. The drive back was quiet. The wind soft. The trees shedding golden leaves like secrets falling gently into place. By the time I returned to Ashford Estate, dusk had settled. Dominic was in the garden, sleeves rolled, dirt on his hands. Planting something in the cold earth. You found her, he said without looking up. I did. And? It's over, I said. He stood slowly, brushed his hands on his trousers. No. It's just finally begun. That night we lit a fire. Not because the house was cold, but because warmth, once found, deserved to be celebrated. We curled under the same blanket. No more questions. No more locked doors. Later, lying beside him in the quiet, I whispered, Do you believe in second chances? No, he said. I turned, surprised. He kissed my forehead. I believe in earned chances. And we've earned this one. Weeks passed. Winter came, soft and early. The third floor remained open now, its silence gentler, no longer haunted but honored. We moved into the master bedroom. Together. The staff adjusted. Ellis even smiled. Spring arrived quietly. The trees bloomed again. We planted lavender in the garden. One morning, while sorting through an old drawer, I found something new. A small note tucked into a book I hadn't opened. Written in Sarah's hand, if she ever returns to this house. Give her my forgiveness. And tell her I never stopped waiting. Not in anger, but in love. As I pressed the note to my lips, then tucked it into Eleanor's box, closed it gently, but didn't lock it. Because some stories are not meant to be sealed, only shared, quietly, truthfully, so they no longer hurt. And as the light spilled across the bed that morning, Dominic whispered, You saved this place. No, I said. They did. I just listened. He smiled, pulled me closer. Our hands intertwined, steady now. No ghosts between us, only roots. Mine, his, forever. If this story touched something in you, something quiet, something deep, don't forget to give it a like. And if you'd like to stay with us for more stories of love, memory, and second chances, subscribe to the channel. There's always another chapter waiting to be told.